cafe was warm and bright, full of chatter and clinking cups. At the corner table sat a young woman in a wheelchair, hands folded on her lap, eyes fixed on the door. Her date wasn't coming. The clock said it all. People glanced, whispered, then looked away, until a small voice broke the silence. "Daddy, why is she sad?" A man in a navy suit turned. The next moment, he and his little girl walked over, and everything changed. Claire Bennett had learned to measure hope in 15-minute increments. 15 minutes late could be traffic. 30 minutes could be an emergency. 45 minutes was a pattern. An hour meant acceptance of what she'd known somewhere deep down from the moment she'd swiped right on his profile, that the wheelchair in her photos was a deal breaker disguised as open-mindedness. At 29, Claire had rebuilt herself once already. The car accident 2 years ago had taken her legs, her dance career, and the life she'd spent 27 years building. She'd survived the hospital, the surgeries, the brutal physical therapy, the crushing realization that her body would never move the way it used to. She'd learned to navigate a world built for people who stood, learned to ignore the stares, learned to find new purpose in graphic design when choreography became impossible. But she hadn't learned how to stop hoping that someone might see past the chair to the person in it. Tonight was supposed to be different. Marcus from the dating app had seemed genuinely interested, asked thoughtful questions, suggested this cafe near her apartment so she wouldn't have to travel far. She'd allowed herself to believe, to put on makeup and the green sweater that brought out her eyes, to practice the route here until she could navigate it smoothly, to arrive early and position herself where he'd see her easily. Now she'd been waiting 73 minutes. The waiter had asked twice if she wanted to order. The couple at the next table had cycled through their entire meal, and Claire sat with cold coffee and dying hope, trying to decide how long to wait before admitting this was another lesson in lowered expectations. Around her, the cafe hummed with life. First dates discovering chemistry, established couples comfortable in silence, friends laughing over shared desserts, life moving forward while Claire remained stationary in ways that had nothing to do with her legs. "Daddy, why is she sad?" The child's voice cut through Claire's careful composure. A little girl, maybe 6, stood beside Claire's table with the unfiltered directness only children possessed. She had dark curls and her father's eyes, and she looked at Claire with pure curiosity rather than pity. "Sophie," a man's voice said, approaching quickly, "we don't interrupt people. I'm so sorry." Claire looked up at the man, tall, maybe late 30s, wearing a navy suit with the tie loosened, looking exhausted and apologetic in equal measure. He reached for his daughter's hand, clearly intending to pull her away. "It's okay," Claire heard herself say. "She's not wrong. I am a little sad." Sophie tilted her head, considering. "Did someone make you sad?" "Someone didn't show up when they said they would." "That's rude," Sophie announced with 6-year-old certainty. "Daddy says we always keep promises, even when we don't want to." The man, Ethan, he'd introduce himself moments later, looked mortified. "Sophie, we should let this lady—" "We were just about to order dessert," Claire interrupted, surprising herself. "Would you mind if you joined me? It seems silly to have a whole table to myself." Ethan hesitated, clearly weighing politeness against intrusion, but Sophie was already climbing into the chair across from Claire. "I like chocolate cake. What do you like?" And just like that, a table meant for rejection became one of unexpected company. Ethan sat cautiously, still apologetic. "We don't have to stay if you'd rather be alone." "I've been alone for over an hour," Claire said. "Company sounds perfect." Sophie chattered freely, asking Claire questions about her wheelchair, with the shameless curiosity adults had learned to suppress. "Does it go fast? Can you do tricks? My friend Tommy has a wheelchair, and he can spin in circles really good." Claire found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. "I can't do tricks, but I can design really cool graphics on my computer. Want to see?" She pulled out her tablet, showing Sophie some of her recent work, illustrations for children's books, logo designs, the digital art she'd turned to when she could no longer express herself through movement. Sophie was entranced, asking questions about colors and how Claire made the pictures move. Ethan watched quietly, and when Claire glanced at him, she saw something in his expression, not pity, but recognition. The look of someone who understood loss, who recognized the work of rebuilding. "You're very good," he said simply. Thank you. I used to be a dancer. Now I draw movement instead. Then you never stopped dancing, Ethan replied softly. You just found a different stage. As the cafe slowly emptied around them, the three remained. Sophie coloring on napkins with crayons the waiter had provided. Claire and Ethan talking with the ease of people who'd both learned that life could change in moments. That plans meant nothing against circumstance. That rebuilding required accepting help. Ethan told her about his wife, Sophie's mother, who died 18 months ago from cancer. How he'd thrown himself into his role as CEO of his family's tech company while trying to be present for Sophie, failing at both more often than he succeeded. How Sophie had started asking strangers questions because she was learning to navigate a world without her mother and hadn't yet learned which questions were supposed to stay silent. She's remarkable, Claire said, watching Sophie carefully draw stick figures. You're doing something right. I'm doing something desperate, Ethan corrected, taking her everywhere because I can't leave her with sitters constantly, answering her impossible questions about death and grief and why some people get to stay and others don't. Trying to teach her that the world is good despite all evidence to the contrary. Maybe that's what being a good parent is, showing up even when you don't have answers. Is that what you do? Show up. Claire thought about it honestly. I try. Some days it's harder than others. Some days I wake up and forget for a moment that everything changed, and then I remember and have to decide whether to face the day or hide from it. Tonight was supposed to be a facing it day, trying to date again, to be normal again. Clearly that went well. His loss, Ethan said simply. Anyone who stands you up is an idiot. Or just someone who couldn't handle the wheelchair. That's usually what it is. People say they're open-minded until they have to actually navigate accessibility or deal with the reality of what my life looks like now. Then they were never worth your time. Claire smiled despite herself. You're kind. I don't know if I believe you, but you're kind. Sophie looked up from her drawing. I'm done. Look. She'd drawn 3 stick figures around a circle, clearly a table. One figure was smaller, one was taller, one sat in something with wheels. All 3 had enormous smiles. That's us, Sophie announced proudly. At the table, being friends. Claire felt her throat go tight. Can I keep this? Yes, it's for you, because friends give presents. Sophie paused thoughtfully. We are friends now, right? I'd like that very much, Claire whispered. As closing time approached, they finally left the cafe together. Ethan insisted on walking Claire to her car. Adapted van, hand controls, the expensive modifications that insurance had fought about covering. Sophie held Claire's hand as they walked, chattering about everything and nothing. Do you come here often? Ethan asked at her van. Claire smiled. Only when I want to get stood up in style. Then next time we'll bring better company, if you'd want that. We're not much, just a workaholic CEO and his overly curious daughter. But we show up when we say we will. Next time sounds perfect. They exchanged numbers. Sophie hugged Claire goodbye, a fierce, unself-conscious hug that made Claire's eyes sting. And as she drove home, Claire looked at the napkin drawing on her passenger seat and felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope that wasn't measured in disappointed increments, but in the possibility of actual connection. Over the following weeks, Ethan and Sophie became fixtures in Claire's life. They'd show up at the cafe unannounced, bringing coffee or treats, staying for hours talking about nothing consequential. Sophie loved Claire's artwork, begging to watch her work, asking endless questions about design and color and how to make pictures that told stories. Ethan was quieter, but his presence felt steady, asking about Claire's day, her work, her physical therapy progress without making it the only thing they discussed. He treated her wheelchair like what it was, a mobility device, not her entire identity. And that casual acceptance meant more than any grand gesture could have. One afternoon, Sophie asked the question adults avoided. Does it hurt, being in the chair? Sometimes, Claire answered honestly. My legs hurt even though they don't work the way they used to. It's called phantom pain. Your brain remembers how things felt before and gets confused. And sometimes my back hurts from sitting all day, but mostly it's just different. Not bad or good, just different from before. Do you miss dancing? Every single day. But I found new ways to move. Through art, through meeting people like you, through building a life that works even though it's not the life I plan. Hakori, Sophie nodded seriously, processing. My mommy's gone, but I still talk to her. Daddy says that's okay. That missing people is how we remember them. Claire glanced at Ethan, saw the pain that flashed across his face before he smoothed it away. Your daddy's very smart. He's sad sometimes, though, like you were sad when we met. Sometimes being sad is just what happens when you care about people. It means they mattered. Do we matter? Sophie asked. To you. Claire felt her throat tighten. So much. More than you know. The friendship deepened naturally. Coffee dates becoming dinner invitations, Sophie's drawings covering Claire's refrigerator, Ethan calling just to check in or share something funny Sophie had said. Claire found herself looking forward to their visits, planning her schedule around their spontaneous appearances, feeling disappointment on days they didn't show up. She was falling for them, for Sophie's unfiltered joy, for Ethan's quiet steadiness, for the way they'd walked into her life and simply stayed. And that terrified her, because people didn't stay. Not for her, not anymore. The photograph appeared in a tabloid blog, grainy, clearly taken from across the street, showing Ethan and Sophie leaving the cafe with Claire. The headline was predictably cruel. Widowed CEO's new companion. Is Ethan Cole dating a disabled woman? Claire saw it before Ethan did. A friend sent it with horrified apologies, and Claire read the article with growing nausea. The speculation about Ethan's judgment, the questions about whether his grief had made him vulnerable to unconventional relationships, the barely veiled suggestion that Claire was somehow taking advantage of a grieving man and his daughter. She didn't answer Ethan's next 3 calls. Sent a text. You don't need to fix me, Ethan. I've learned to live broken. Ethan called again immediately. She let it go to voicemail. He left a message. Claire, whatever you saw, whatever anyone said, please let me explain. Please. But Claire had spent 2 years learning that the world saw her wheelchair before they saw her, that she'd always be categorized as inspiration porn or object of pity or problem to be solved. The idea that Ethan might see her the same way, that his kindness was really charity, his friendship really obligation, hurt worse than anything since the accident. Olivia, Ethan's assistant, had warned him this would happen. Sir, people are asking questions. The board is concerned about your judgment, especially with the merger negotiations ongoing. This friendship, Ethan corrected sharply. This friendship is being scrutinized. Perhaps some distance would be wise. But Ethan had watched Claire come alive over the past weeks, had seen her laugh genuinely, had witnessed her teaching Sophie about art and resilience and finding joy in unexpected places. Distance felt like betrayal. He drove to her apartment in the rain, heart pounding, seeing her silhouette by the window. She buzzed him up reluctantly, and he found her with the crumpled tabloid on her coffee table. I'm sorry, he started. For what? For being photographed with me? For people making assumptions? Claire's voice was brittle. You don't have to apologize for the world being what it is. I'm sorry that people's ignorance hurt you, that they saw something beautiful, friendship, connection, and twisted it into something ugly. Is it friendship, though? Or is it what they said? You trying to fix your grief by fixing me? Claire gestured at her chair. I don't need to be fixed, Ethan. I'm not a project or a charity case or your late wife's replacement or whatever people think this is. You were never broken, Ethan said quietly, moving closer. You were just waiting for someone to sit down. The words broke something in Claire, the careful armor she'd built, the protective distance she'd maintained. She started crying, not from pain, but from being seen, truly seen, maybe for the first time since the accident. Ethan knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. Sophie asked me last night why you weren't answering our calls. She cried, said maybe you decided we weren't good enough to be your friends anymore. And I realized we need you as much as you might need us. You've taught Sophie that being different isn't being less. You've taught me that showing up matters more than having answers. You've reminded both of us that life can still hold joy even after loss. People are going to keep judging, keep making assumptions. Let them. They don't live in my life or make my choices. You do, if you want to. No pressure, no expectations, just the offer to keep showing up for coffee and conversation and whatever this becomes. Claire looked at him through tears. What if it becomes something more than friendship? Then we figure it out together, or we don't, and we stay friends. Either way, I'm not walking away because some tabloid doesn't understand why a man might value a woman for her art and kindness and the way she makes his daughter laugh. Sophie's voice carried from the doorway. Ethan had brought her, trusting Claire wouldn't turn away a 6-year-old even if she was angry at him. Claire, are you mad at us? Claire wiped her eyes. No, sweetheart, never at you. Then why won't you answer our calls? Because sometimes grown-ups get scared of being hurt or disappointing people or not being enough. But you're more than enough, Sophie said with absolute certainty. You're my best friend besides Daddy, and Daddy smiles when he talks about you. He didn't smile like that before. Claire looked at Ethan, saw confirmation in his expression, that this was real, that whatever they were building mattered to him, that she wasn't a project or charity, but a person he valued. Okay, she whispered. Okay, we keep going. But if it gets too complicated, if it hurts Sophie or your company or... We'll handle it, Ethan interrupted. Together. That's what friends do. What family does. Family. The word hung between them, possibility and promise combined. 3 months later, Claire sat in her apartment surrounded by artwork. Dozens of sketches based on Sophie's original napkin drawing, developing it into something more. A children's book about a little girl who learned to see people differently, who found friendship in unexpected places, who sat down so others could stand up. The title had come from Sophie herself, The Girl Who Sat Down So Others Could Stand. Claire had worked on it obsessively, pouring everything she learned about resilience and connection, and the courage it took to keep hoping. Ethan had offered to publish it through his company's small press division, but Claire insisted it be done properly, submitted to real publishers, judged on merit rather than connections. But when it sold, and sold quickly, to an editor who cried reading the manuscript, Ethan offered his company's resources for production and distribution, making sure it reached readers who needed it most. The book launch happened at a community center, not a bookstore, deliberately accessible, filled with families and children with disabilities and anyone who'd ever felt left behind. Claire read excerpts while Sophie acted out scenes, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. For the girl who never let me eat alone again, Claire wrote in Sophie's copy, signing it with shaking hands. Sophie hugged her fiercely. It's the best book ever, better than all my other books combined. That's high praise. It's true praise. Daddy says those are different. The book became a quiet success. Not a bestseller, but something more valuable. A resource for families navigating disability, for children learning empathy, for adults remembering that connection mattered more than perfection. Claire did interviews about representation and the importance of telling stories where disability wasn't tragedy, but just part of life's complexity. And through it all, Ethan and Sophie remained constants. Coffee at the Café every Sunday morning, their corner table reserved because the staff had adopted them as regulars. Sophie's artwork covered Claire's apartment, and Claire's designs hung in Ethan's office. They celebrated Sophie's 7th birthday together, weathered Claire's bad pain days together, navigated the complexity of their growing feelings together. Because somewhere between friendship and something more, Claire and Ethan had fallen into a relationship neither had been looking for, but both needed. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, just a gradual recognition that they'd built something worth protecting, that their individual lives had become tangled in ways that felt essential rather than optional. Ethan was careful never to treat Claire like she needed rescuing. He asked before helping, respected her autonomy, learned the difference between support and condescension. And Claire learned to accept help without shame, to trust that Ethan saw her as a whole person rather than a collection of limitations. Sophie, with childish wisdom, simply accepted them as a unit. She started calling Claire's apartment home too, and asked regularly when Claire would move in with them officially. Neither adult knew how to answer that question yet, but they were working toward it, slowly, carefully, building foundations strong enough to support whatever they became. The cafe remained their tradition. Every Sunday morning, same table, same corner, same laughter. The staff knew their orders, saved their table, smiled at the family they'd watched form in their establishment. "You know," Ethan said one Sunday, "I've been thinking about that first night. When I got spectacularly stood up. When Sophie and I walked over because she couldn't understand why anyone would leave someone sad and alone." He paused. "I was terrified you'd tell us to leave, that you'd see us as intrusive or pitying. I almost did. But Sophie was so earnest, and you looked so apologetic, and I was so tired of being alone. I'm glad you let us sit down." Claire reached for his hand across the table. "Me too. Best terrible date I ever had." 9 months after that first meeting, Sophie orchestrated a surprise that required her father's cooperation and her own considerable determination. She decorated their usual cafe table with flowers. Real ones, not fake, because Claire deserved real things. She wrote a note in her careful second-grade handwriting, "You don't need to wait for anyone anymore." Ethan had helped with logistics, but the idea was entirely Sophie's. Claire was waiting for someone who never came, so we should tell her she doesn't have to wait anymore because we're already here. The cafe staff were in on it, clearing the table early and keeping it reserved. When Claire arrived for their usual Sunday morning, she wheeled up to find the flowers and note, and Sophie barely containing her excitement. "We planned it," Sophie announced, abandoning any pretense of surprise. "To tell you, you're part of our family table now. Forever. Sonny." Claire looked at Ethan, who shrugged with a smile. She insisted, "I just provided the flowers." "You two are ridiculous," Claire managed through tears. "Ridiculously in love with you," Ethan said softly, and the cafe went quiet around them. What? "I love you. Sophie loves you. We want you in our lives permanently, not just Sunday mornings. If you want that, no pressure, just, we're choosing you, Claire. Officially, publicly, permanently." Claire stared at him, at Sophie's hopeful face, at the flowers and note and the table where everything had started. "This is a lot for a Sunday morning. Too much?" "No. Perfect. Absolutely perfect." She reached for both their hands. "I choose you too. Both of you. I've been choosing you for months. I just didn't think that we'd choose back," Ethan finished gently. "We've been choosing you since Sophie asked why you were sad. Maybe before that. Maybe the universe conspired to make sure we all ended up here." They sat together as the cafe filled with Sunday morning regulars, their table a small island of happiness in the ordinary world. Outside, people walked past, living their lives, making their choices, finding their connections. But at that one table, 3 people who'd all learned about loss and rebuilding and the courage it took to keep hoping had found something worth protecting. Not perfect. Sophie would still ask embarrassing questions. Ethan would still struggle to balance work and fatherhood. Claire would still have bad pain days and moments of grief for the dancer she'd been. But they'd face it together, showing up, sitting down, choosing each other. "You were never someone's pity, Claire," Ethan said, holding her hand while Sophie leaned against her shoulder. "You were someone's miracle. Our miracle." Sophie nodded sleepily. "The best miracle. Better than all the other miracles." Claire laughed through happy tears, looking at her family. Chosen, unexpected, absolutely real. "Better than all the other miracles," she agreed. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone left behind is simply to sit down and stay. To choose presence over pity, connection over charity, showing up over giving up. Sometimes 3 broken people can build something whole together. Sometimes the worst date of your life leads to the best family you never knew you needed. And sometimes a 6-year-old's question, 'Daddy, why is she sad?' becomes the beginning of everyone's healing."